On a freezing January night in 1950, Boston's streets stood silent until shadows moved in the dark. Men in Halloween masks waited outside the Brinks depot, their eyes fixed on millions of dollars inside. What followed wasn't just a robbery, it was a betrayal so deep, it would haunt them all for the rest of their lives. The night was bitterly cold, January 17th, 1950, Boston. A sharp wind cut across empty streets, rattling against the brick walls of the North End. At 6:55 p.m., the city's oldest armored car depot, the Brinks headquarters, sat quiet under flickering street lamps. Inside, clerks counted the day's cash. Outside, a group of men in heavy coats and Halloween masks stood in the shadows, watching. Moments later, that quiet would shatter. What unfolded was no ordinary robbery. It would become one of the most infamous heists in American history, sparking a 6-year manhunt, a story of betrayal, and a secret so carefully hidden it nearly disappeared forever. But here's the thing. What the police didn't know that night was that this heist wasn't just about money. Behind those masks were men whose lives were already bound together by desperation, lies, and one haunting mistake that would eventually bring them all down. The heart of this story begins with Joseph "Specs" O'Keefe, a wiry man with restless eyes and a temper as volatile as the gun he carried. Specs had grown up on Boston's rougher edges, where opportunity came not from school books but from backroom deals and quick scores. By 1950, he was deep in the city's underworld, a gambler, a safecracker, a man who owed more favors than he could repay. The Brinks building loomed on Prince Street, a fortress-like depot with steel doors, barred windows, and guards who never smiled. The air smelled of diesel from armored trucks that groaned into the garage, their engines echoing off the narrow cobblestone streets. For Boston residents, this was just part of the neighborhood's soundtrack. For Specs and his crew, it was the sound of opportunity. That night, inside the counting room, Brinks employees stacked cash, millions in payrolls, deposits, and coins. They laughed about dinner plans, never noticing the silence building outside. Specs crouched in the alley with 6 other men, each wearing rubber Halloween masks, navy pea coats, and gloves. Their breaths puffed white in the air. The plan had been rehearsed for months. Neutralize the guards, take the cash, vanish into the night. Clocks ticking, whispered Stanley Gushora, shifting nervously. "Shut up," Specs hissed. He adjusted his revolver, heart pounding. This wasn't just another score. If it went wrong, it meant life sentences. Maybe worse. Inside, a guard turned toward the door, just as the lock clicked open. The men stormed in. "Hands up," one shouted, his mask stretching grotesquely in the dim light. The employees froze. The robbers bound them with rope, forcing them face down on the floor. One guard's glasses clattered against the tiles. The cash room echoed with hurried breathing and the soft thud of moneybags hitting the floor. The robbers moved with military precision, stuffing nearly $3 million, an unimaginable fortune in 1950, into canvas sacks. Then came the first crack in the plan. A clerk, trembling, tried to peek up. Specs shoved him back down, but not before the man caught a glimpse of his hand, where a small scar crossed the knuckle. It was a detail forgotten in the frenzy, but one that would later haunt him. Minutes later, the men vanished into the night, slipping into a waiting truck. Boston would wake the next morning to chaos. Newspapers blared, "Crime of the Century." Detectives flooded the city, swarming bars, pool halls, and docks. But the robbers had left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints, no shells, just ropes, tape, and an empty counting room. This job, it was perfect, muttered FBI agent Hugh Clegg, staring at the ransacked depot. Too perfect. In smoky backrooms across Boston, whispers began. People said Specs was flashing cash. Others claimed he'd been reckless, bragging after a few too many drinks. Specs dismissed it all. But paranoia was already spreading like rot through the crew. Because what no one knew yet was that the men who pulled this job weren't hardened professionals bound by loyalty. They were fragile, greedy, and soon, desperate. For 6 years, the FBI hunted ghosts. The robbers had vanished into thin air, dividing their shares and living quietly. But in 1955, cracks appeared. Specs O'Keefe was arrested on a weapons charge in Pennsylvania. In his car, agents found a stash of cash, bundles still wrapped in Brinks bands. Suddenly, the perfect crime wasn't so perfect anymore. Behind bars, Specs seethed. His friends weren't helping with bail. They weren't sending money. They'd cut him off. To the FBI, this smelled like opportunity. An agent leaned across the interrogation table. "Specs, you've been hung out to dry. Help us, and maybe you don't spend the rest of your life in Walpole Prison." For the first time, Specs considered it. The shocking truth exploded in 1956. Under pressure, O'Keefe flipped. He told investigators everything: names, roles, the months of planning. The crew had rehearsed dozens of times, even breaking into Brinks after hours months before to memorize the layout. The masks, the rope, the exact timing, it had all been his idea. But now, in a stunning betrayal, Specs used those same details to bring the entire gang down. In one chilling testimony, he pointed directly at the men he'd once called brothers. "They left me to rot," he spat. "Now I'll see them rot instead." The FBI swept in, arresting 11 men. Shackles clanged as they were led into courtrooms packed with reporters. Flashbulbs exploded. The defendants glared across the room at Specs, hatred burning in their eyes. "You sold us out, Joe," muttered Vincent Costa as marshals dragged him past. Specs smirked, but his hands trembled. He knew what betrayal meant in Boston's underworld. Retaliation wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. The trial was electric. Jurors leaned forward as prosecutors detailed the masks, the ropes, the millions still missing. Each revelation twisted the knife deeper. The perfect crime was unraveling in real time. By 1956, most of the Brinks gang was convicted. Some were sentenced to life. Others received long terms. But the cash? Only a fraction was ever recovered. Millions vanished into thin air, never traced. Specs, the star witness, avoided the harshest penalty, but his life was effectively destroyed. He lived the rest of his days in fear, looking over his shoulder, waiting for revenge that never came, at least not immediately. Boston, meanwhile, had changed. The Brinks robbery wasn't just a heist. It became a legend, a story parents told their children, a crime that reshaped how banks, guards, and even the FBI approached security. And yet, this isn't where the story ends. Because even as the gang rotted in prison, and Specs hid in the shadows, a shocking rumor began to spread. One that suggested not all of the money had been lost. That somewhere, hidden deep in Boston's streets, the missing fortune was still waiting. And if that rumor was true, then the Brinks robbery wasn't over. The aftermath of the crime of the century, and the dark secret that refused to stay buried. By 1956, the trial was over. The jury had spoken. The men behind the Brinks robbery, the largest cash heist in American history, were sentenced to long, punishing years in prison. Boston exhaled, believing justice had finally caught up with the masked men who had once seemed untouchable. But beneath that courtroom victory, shadows still lingered. Millions of dollars from the robbery were missing. Entire sacks of Brinks money had simply vanished. And while Joseph Specs O'Keefe sat under FBI protection, Whispers moved like smoke through Boston's underworld. The cash was still out there. It was a rumor too dangerous to ignore, because money that large doesn't just disappear. It changes hands. It sparks betrayals. And, sometimes, it leaves behind bodies. The FBI closed their case with pride, parading the convictions as proof of their reach. Agents packed up files, reporters typed their headlines, and the world moved on. But the north end of Boston didn't forget. Neighborhood bars hummed with speculation. Dock workers swore they saw duffel bags being loaded into boats late at night. Others claimed the money had been stashed in a barn in New Hampshire or buried in the frozen ground of Maine. The truth was murkier. Investigators had only recovered about $58,000, a fraction of the nearly $3 million stolen. The rest had evaporated. Even in prison, the convicted men refused to talk. They sat stone-faced, their loyalty strangely unbroken, as if protecting something far greater than freedom itself. While the world called Specs a traitor, he lived under guard, moving from safe house to safe house. He chain-smoked, jumped at shadows, and stared out windows long into the night. "They'll come for me," he muttered to an agent once. "You don't just cross men like that." The agent had shrugged. "They're locked up, Joe. You're safe." But Joe knew better. Prison bars didn't stop vendettas. And besides, the money was still missing. Somebody had it. And in Boston, money like that was reason enough to kill. In the fall of 1957, a lead emerged. A farmer in rural Massachusetts reported finding a rotting canvas bag hidden in the rafters of an abandoned shed. Inside were weathered bills, bundles stamped with the Brinks insignia. The discovery reignited the fire. If some of the loot had been hidden in barns, how much more was scattered across New England? FBI agents retraced old connections, interviewing wives, cousins, and distant associates. They found traces of lavish purchases, a new car here, a sudden trip to Florida there. But none of it explained where the majority of the fortune had gone. The idea began to circulate that one man, maybe even someone never charged, was quietly hoarding the rest. Inside Walpole Prison, tensions boiled. The convicted men whispered that Specs had not only betrayed them, but had also helped himself to a larger share before the bust. One day, during the exercise yard, Vincent Costa leaned toward a fellow inmate. "Specs thinks he's smart. But when we're out, if we ever get out, he's the first name on the list." Outside, rumors placed Specs in hiding in rural Pennsylvania, his nerves fraying. He wrote letters to his wife filled with paranoia, warning her not to trust anyone. Each night, he slept with a revolver at his bedside. Meanwhile, FBI agents were under pressure. 6 years of chasing ghosts had ended with convictions. Yes, but the headlines now focused on the money. Where was it? Had the government really solved the crime at all? Then came the break. In 1958, a prison informant slipped the FBI a chilling piece of intelligence. Some of the Brinks gang had orchestrated a secret plan before their arrest. They had stashed large portions of the money with outsiders. Friends, girlfriends, even complete strangers who owed them favors. If true, the heist wasn't just about a robbery. It was about a network. And it meant that even with the main crew behind bars, pieces of the crime were still alive on the streets. But here was the kicker. The informant insisted that one of the stashes had been compromised. Someone had dug into the loot and was spending it. In early 1959, federal agents raided a modest house in Chelsea, Massachusetts. There, hidden beneath floorboards, they found bundles of Brinks cash, wrapped so tightly the paper had begun to rot. The money was traced to a woman connected to one of the imprisoned robbers. The discovery was explosive. It confirmed what many suspected. The loot had been scattered, hidden with trusted outsiders. And now, those outsiders were being hunted, not just by the FBI, but by anyone desperate to claim a piece of the legendary fortune. But even as the FBI celebrated, a darker truth emerged. The informant had warned them. One of the stashes wasn't just money. It was evidence. Something that, if revealed, could reopen the entire case. By 1960, prison whispers had hardened into fury. Members of the Brinks gang had nothing left but time and revenge. One evening, inside Walpole's mess hall, an inmate slammed a tray onto the table. Specs sold us out. But he didn't sell the money. Somebody's still sitting on it. The room fell silent. Eyes burned with rage. Back on the outside, the FBI scrambled to keep Specs alive. He moved again, this time under a new alias. But the walls were closing in. He knew too much, and if the wrong person caught up to him, it wouldn't just be his life at risk. Because the missing money wasn't just cash anymore. It was leverage, power, and a death sentence for anyone caught holding it. By the mid-1960s, most of the Brinks robbers had resigned themselves to life behind bars. A few clung to hope of parole. Specs himself faded into obscurity, still haunted, still hunted, still muttering about the shadows outside his window. But the money, that was the ghost that refused to die. Reports trickled in for decades, an old bill surfacing in circulation here, a whispered confession there. And each time, the question rose again. Who really had the last laugh? And then, just when it seemed the story was finished, came a revelation no one expected. In the late 1970s, a construction crew renovating a Boston building unearthed a sealed metal container. Inside were bundles of decayed bills, unmistakably tied to the Brinks robbery. The discovery reignited the case, forcing investigators to wonder. How many more caches were still buried beneath Boston's streets? And more disturbingly, who knew about them? Because if someone was still guarding the fortune, then even decades later, the Brinks robbery wasn't history. It was a fuse, waiting to explode. Decades after the crime of the century, the missing millions resurface, and with them, new danger. For most, the Brinks robbery was history, a black and white headline from 1950, locked in dusty archives. The robbers were either dead, old, or long forgotten. But money doesn't fade with time. It lingers, it tempts, it whispers. And in the late 1970s, almost 30 years after that winter night in Boston, the robbery's shadow returned. A construction crew digging beneath a crumbling building stumbled on something buried deep in the earth. A rusted container filled with rotting, bundled cash. The discovery sent shockwaves through the city. The money was real. The robbery wasn't just legend. And the question that terrified investigators most was simple. If this was here, what else was still out there? Reporters swarmed the scene, flashing cameras as FBI agents collected the decayed bills. They confirmed what many suspected. The bundles were stamped with the Brinks seal. "It's authentic," one agent muttered, staring at the crumbling paper. "This is part of the missing haul." The FBI reopened files long thought closed. Suddenly, the old robbery wasn't just history. It was an active mystery again. Speculation ran wild. Some believed hidden caches were scattered across Boston, buried in basements, walls, or even beneath sidewalks. Others swore the money had traveled farther, stashed in the woods of New Hampshire or smuggled onto fishing boats that slipped quietly out of the harbor. By then, Joseph Specs O'Keefe had vanished into obscurity. Frail, paranoid, and living under assumed names, he was no longer the sharp-eyed safecracker but a ghost of his former self. Other members of the gang had died in prison. A few, released after decades, shuffled into the world as old men, unrecognizable from the masked figures who once held Boston at gunpoint. But whispers remained. Some said that even from prison, The crew had directed outsiders to recover the hidden stashes. Others insisted that one man, not named in court, never arrested, had been quietly collecting the money for years. The FBI wanted answers. The families of the gang wanted answers. And Boston? Well, Boston wanted its ghost story solved. In 1980, an anonymous tip led agents to a small cottage outside Lowell, Massachusetts. Beneath loose floorboards, they uncovered yet another stash, tens of thousands in decayed Brinks cash. But here's the thing, someone had been there before them. The floorboards were freshly disturbed, the stash smaller than expected. Whoever had hidden it had already returned to claim most of it. That chilling discovery shifted the investigation. This wasn't about relics of the past anymore. Someone was actively moving through Boston, retrieving long-buried money. Someone who still knew the map. A break came from an unlikely source. In 1983, an old associate of the Brinks crew, on his deathbed, confessed to his priest. He revealed that the money had been divided into multiple stashes across Massachusetts, entrusted to clean hands who would never be suspected. But his confession carried a darker warning. "They are still watching it," he rasped. "Still guarding it. If you dig too deep, you don't find money. You find death." The priest, shaken, passed the story to federal authorities. Quietly, the FBI launched a new investigation, not into the robbery itself, but into who was controlling the legacy of the missing millions. By the late 1980s, a startling theory emerged. The Brinks money had not simply been scattered and forgotten. It had been laundered, slowly, carefully, into Boston's underground economy. Loan sharking, real estate, gambling dens. The money was alive, feeding new generations of crime. In other words, the robbery never ended. The masked men might have gone to prison, but their fortune had birthed something larger, an inheritance of corruption that still pulsed through the city. And when the FBI began tracing those financial threads, they hit resistance, not from old gangsters, but from younger, sharper figures with no intention of letting the past resurface. One night in 1989, a retired FBI agent who had worked the original case received a phone call. A gravelly voice whispered through the line, "Stop digging. Brinks is dead. Let it stay dead." Days later, his car was found burned on the outskirts of town. The case files he'd been compiling, gone. The message was clear. The missing millions weren't just history. They were property. Property that someone was still willing to kill for. By the 1990s, the Brinks robbery had become something else entirely. A legend that bled into the present. The original thieves were gone, but their crime lived on through the money they left behind. Journalists hunted leads. Treasure seekers dug basements. Families whispered secrets passed down from fathers who had once known someone. And each rumor rekindled the same haunting question. Was the missing fortune still out there? And then, in 2003, more than half a century after the robbery, Boston police received a shocking tip. A man renovating his late uncle's house in Dorchester had found something sealed inside the walls. He claimed it wasn't just money. It was a notebook, a detailed log of stash locations. But before investigators could secure it, the man disappeared. The house was found empty. The notebook, gone. And with it, the Brinks robbery had been pulled violently into the 21st century. The missing notebook, a vanished man, and a crime that refuses to stay buried. In 2003, more than 50 years after the Brinks robbery shook Boston, the past resurfaced with terrifying clarity. A man renovating his late uncle's home in Dorchester claimed to have found something hidden inside the walls. A notebook said to contain detailed stash locations of the missing millions. If true, it would be the key to solving one of America's greatest mysteries. But before investigators could secure it, the man vanished. His house was left eerily silent, the notebook gone. And suddenly, the Brinks robbery wasn't just history. It was a living crime, bleeding into the present. Boston police searched the Dorchester property, peeling back walls, sifting through dust, tearing up old floors. But no notebook, no money, no trace of the man. Neighbors said they saw him leave late one evening, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. A dark sedan followed slowly behind. He never returned. Investigators treated it as a missing person case, but older detectives whispered a different theory. Whoever still controlled the Brinks fortune had moved swiftly to silence him. The money was still being protected. By now, the Brinks robbery had become myth, passed down through generations. Children of the original crew grew up hearing fragments of the story, hints about a score that went wrong, or money that was supposed to change everything. Some of them stayed silent. Others drank too much and let details slip at family gatherings. And then there were those who seemed to know more than they should. Descendants who suddenly had resources far beyond their means, quietly benefiting from wealth no one could trace. In 2007, a young journalist named Daniel Hart began digging into the Dorchester disappearance. He tracked the family, interviewed neighbors, and discovered something unsettling. The missing man's uncle had once worked as a truck mechanic for Brinks. It wasn't coincidence. It was connection. Hart pushed deeper, publishing an article suggesting the Brinks loot might still exist, hidden in Boston neighborhoods. The piece went viral, reigniting interest in the case. But weeks later, Hart received a package on his doorstep. Inside was a charred notebook cover. No pages, just the smell of smoke and the faint, burned imprint of numbers that looked like coordinates. Tucked inside was a single note written in red ink. "Stop digging." Hart refused to stop. He traced the burned numbers to a wooded property outside Worcester, Massachusetts. When he arrived, he found concrete slabs buried beneath vines, as if something had once been hidden underground. A local farmer told him that years ago, strangers had come with trucks late at night, digging and pouring concrete before vanishing. Hart realized the truth. The Brinks money had been moved repeatedly, each time buried deeper, hidden further, protected by silence and fear. And if the notebook had survived, it could still reveal the final resting place of the fortune. Then came the breakthrough. In 2010, Boston police investigating organized crime wiretaps overheard a chilling exchange between two men. The old money's still hot. Then we keep it buried. When pressed, one of the men referred to it only as Brink's blood. This wasn't just a robbery anymore. It was a curse. Every time someone got close to the missing millions, they vanished, or worse. The notebook was more than a map. It was a death warrant. Hart, undeterred, tracked down one of the last living relatives of Joseph Specs O'Keefe. The man, frail and bitter, refused to talk at first. But then, after a long silence, he leaned in and whispered, "You think the money's buried? That's not what the notebook's about." The money wasn't all cash. Some of it was evidence. Something the government didn't want found. Hart's recorder clicked off as the man's hand trembled. "They'll kill you if you print that," he warned. "They killed my brother. Don't make the same mistake." By the mid-2010s, the Brinks robbery had once again shifted, from an old heist story into something darker, more dangerous. Journalists, investigators, and curious treasure hunters all seemed to circle the mystery, but each time, the trail ended in silence. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the notebook still lingered. If it existed, it wasn't just the key to the missing millions. It might hold the secret to why the money had been protected for decades, guarded not just by criminals but possibly by forces far larger. And then, just 2 years ago, another shock. In 2021, construction workers tearing down an old North End building discovered a hidden compartment behind a brick wall. Inside was a plastic-wrapped bundle of papers. Handwriting, numbers, names. Boston police seized it immediately, refusing to comment on its contents. But one officer, speaking off the record, said only this: "It wasn't just a ledger, it was a warning. And if what's inside is real, then the Brinks robbery was never about money alone." So now the question remains: what exactly did those men steal in 1950? And why is someone still willing to kill to keep it secret? Was the Brinks robbery really just a heist? Or was it part of something much bigger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and join us in part 5, where the mystery deepens in ways no one could have imagined. The end of the legend, the truth behind the missing millions, and the lessons it leaves us today. For more than 70 years, the Brinks robbery has haunted Boston. A daring heist, a betrayal, missing millions. But by 2021, the story had evolved into something else entirely. When workers uncovered that bundle of papers hidden behind a North End wall, investigators realized the case wasn't just about money anymore, it was about secrets. And in the end, the Brinks robbery wouldn't be remembered only as the crime of the century. It would stand as a cautionary tale, a mirror reflecting the greed, loyalty, and betrayal that define not just criminals, but all of us. What exactly did police find in that hidden compartment? Officially, they've never said. But sources claim it wasn't just coordinates to stashes of cash. It was a ledger, names of those who had received portions of the loot after the trial, handwritten notes about payments, and cryptic references to handlers who weren't part of the original crew. One chilling line stood out: "Protect the legacy. Silence the traitors." It confirmed what many suspected. The Brinks money had been more than a payout. It had become a tool, power passed down through generations, guarded with blood and silence. By then, almost every original robber was dead. Specs O'Keefe himself had died decades earlier, an old man still peeking through blinds, still whispering about men who would never forgive. But the fear didn't die with him. Families of the crew carried the weight of silence. Some lived comfortably, their lifestyles hinting at hidden money. Others lived in paranoia, convinced that even mentioning Brinks could bring retribution. Boston's FBI office, when asked, admitted quietly, "We closed the case a long time ago." But the truth? Some cases don't ever really close. Over the years, treasure hunters, journalists, and amateur sleuths continued to search. Shovels tore up basements. Metal detectors scanned fields. And every now and then, a rumor surfaced. A bundle of decayed cash found near a farmhouse in New Hampshire. A fisherman in Maine claiming his grandfather once smuggled Brinks bills out to sea. A woman insisting her father died clutching a key to a locker that no one ever found. But with each rumor came the same wall of silence. The missing millions weren't just money anymore. They had become a myth, dangerous, untouchable, poisoned by blood. The truth is this: only a fraction of the money ever surfaced. Most of it was lost, hidden, stolen, or destroyed. Some may still be buried beneath Boston streets, rotting away with time. But the real treasure wasn't the cash. It was the story, the way the robbery exposed human nature in its rawest form. A perfect plan destroyed by mistrust. Lifelong friendships shattered by betrayal. And lives wasted in prison cells, all for money that, in the end, brought no happiness, no peace, no freedom. The Brinks robbery teaches us something powerful. Greed is a prison, tighter than any cell. Betrayal leaves scars deeper than bullets. And loyalty, once broken, cannot be bought back with millions. The men who planned the perfect crime believed money would solve their problems. Instead, it magnified them. It destroyed their bonds, consumed their years, and left behind nothing but whispers. As Joseph Specs O'Keefe himself once admitted before his death, "We thought we were stealing freedom, but in the end, all we stole was our own lives." That's the tragedy of Brinks. Not the missing millions, not the manhunts, but the wasted potential of men who could have been more, if only they'd chosen differently. As we reflect on this story, here are truths worth carrying into our own lives. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Proverbs 13 verse 11. The true measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him absolutely no good. Samuel Johnson. A betrayal begins with one lie and ends with the loss of everything worth keeping. Money can buy silence, but it can never buy peace. So, after all these years, the Brinks robbery remains both solved and unsolved. Solved, because the men were caught and punished. Unsolved, because the money, and the full truth, will likely never be recovered. But maybe that's the lesson. Maybe the greatest crimes aren't about what's stolen, but about what's lost in the process. Trust, dignity, and time. The Brinks robbery reminds us that the choices we make in pursuit of quick rewards can echo for decades, even generations. In the end, the crime of the century wasn't really about money at all. It was about human weakness, and the price we pay when greed outweighs integrity. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Riches fade, but character remains. What do you think was the real cost of the Brinks robbery? Was it the missing millions, or the lives destroyed by betrayal and greed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to dive into another unbelievable true crime story, don't miss the next video right here on the channel.
Every crime hides more than it reveals, and you don't want to miss what comes next. So before you go, subscribe now, like this video, and click the bell, because the next case might just hold the answer to the one you can't stop thinking about. Join the investigation. Join us behind the crime.